Hello, I'm Henry Park, the film editor for True West magazine, and I write Henry's Western Roundup.
And I'm Courtney Joyner, screenwriter and novelist and Euro-Western fanatic, and we're here to discuss A Pistol for Ringo. One of the actually true original landmark Euro-Westerns that is not particularly well known because it happened to be overshadowed by a certain movie starring Clint Eastwood and directed by this particular director, Duccio Tessari's old associate, Sergio Leone, and made at the exact same time. So this film, I guess we could almost compare it in some ways to Corbucci's Django, that they were all kind of made at the same time.
And one of the nice things about that is you see them without the tremendous influence that Leone's films would have when everyone was more or less forced to imitate Leone. This is a very individual-looking film.
And I think, one perfect place to start is the attitude of the director. Tessari's great quote was, "Leone really believes in what he does. I don't." And I always thought that was a wonderful, perfect statement on his attitude, because this is so lighthearted in so many ways, but it's a vicious movie. It has some real violence in it. It has a very dark sensibility to it, but at the same time, we're already seeing it. It is beautifully directed.
Yes, indeed.
And they spent money on it. And the attitude, here we go.
With a hopscotch.
With a hopscotch to introduce the character in this way, rather than the dour, mysterious stranger who comes to town loaded down with weapons, a la Django, which of course we also love. But this is so completely different in its attitude and just a way of bringing a Western character to light that is not what would then become, as you said, literally the model in every Euro-Western made after a Fistful of Dollars.
That's right. And as you say, it's playful and vicious. He's making all those threats at the same time as he's playing with the kids.
And interesting, too, of course, Angel Face, and here we go, there's Angel Face. And, of course, Angel Eyes, and the use of that moniker, yes, was rather common for so many of these characters. But
although you can understand why this man was Angel Face. Look at Gemma.
Yes,
He's
Gemma,
so handsome.
So handsome and so young. And what I like about him here, of course, is, again, as such a young guy, and this, as you said, this face of innocence, and of course he's wiping out people left and right. But it is also immediately likable. He looks like somebody you could know.
Yeah, very much a nice, regular kind of guy.
Exactly. And
he wants a glass.
And he wants a glass of milk.
Do you think this is a nod to the tradition of the B-Westerns, where the heroes never actually drank, all the bad guys drank?
That's right. Absolutely.
And there we go. Montgomery Wood. Why, who is Montgomery Wood?
Well, of course, this became such the common practice with Euro-Westerns, with stars that were either Spanish or Italian, that they would always anglicize the names. And as I said, we always joke that we love the work of Robert Widmark, who is, of course, one of our eternal favorites. And, of course, even Sergio Leone on the first releases of Fistful of Dollars was not credited.
That's right.
And this, of course, was a decision that was made by the distributors. In this case, it was Embassy, but they left everybody else alone.
Oh, wasn't that a lovely moment there.
Oh yes, absolutely. And we love this film. By the way, as we'll be getting into it a little bit more, is in many ways just kind of this great template for Euro westerns in a lot of ways, because all of these tremendous faces. I think Aldo Sambrell may be the only one who is not here, but Jose Martin and just
Sancho there.
Sancho, of course, and you go, oh my gosh, this one was in this one was in that one, and it shows very much kind of the community that existed in this talent pool in Spain when these films were made. So it wasn't just a matter of reusing these same actors, just not only because they were good, but also because audiences, it almost became like these were the stock company players in a strange way. This became the John Ford
stock companies
of Almira.
Right, absolutely. It became the Corbucci stock company and the Leone stock company.
Yes, the Fernando de Leo stock company, the Damiano Damiini stock company. And
it was all the same stock company.
Yes, it was. Absolutely, it was. This opening shot, I think, is very revealing. Right from the get-go, we see... first of all, of course, it shows that someone's walking past with a Christmas tree, and the fact that this story is set at Christmas
that's very unusual.
Extremely unusual. Yes.
I can think of two westerns of note before this that were set in Christmas. Of course, Three Godfathers, and then the Roy Rogers picture Trail of Robin Hood, which really should have had Christmas in the title somewhere, about smuggling Christmas trees.
Oh, that's right. It sure was. And, of course, Three Godfathers has kind of the biblical implications as well.
Oh, yes.
So it's very much part of, it's kind of its own Christmas story. But this is like Die Hard being set at Christmas.
Yes.
That it's just this great contrast. And, of course, there's the director's wife. And here, Build. As,
oh, yes. What was her name in this again?
Sally Hammond, I believe. Correct?
I believe so. That's Sally something.
Yes. Hallie Hammond.
Hallie, that's
Hallie
it.
Hammond. I always put an S in front of it.
Right.
And she, I like her casting quite well, because you and I always discuss these gorgeous, beautiful Spanish actresses and Italian actresses who ended up in so many Euro westerns and giallos and films being made at this time. And there seemed to be quite a use of eyeliner and mascara and very heavy makeup on a lot of these actresses. It may not have been particularly period appropriate. It's certainly not the way it was applied and used. But she's very naturalistic. And she's not a va-va, she's a very pretty girl, but she's not all va-va-va-voomed up, which is also makes it nice.
That's right. And it'll supply a nice contrast later on.
Yes.
Now, her real name is Lorella DeLuca. There's a Lorea, do we know? Double L? Anyway, and of course, as you said, she was the wife of Duccio Tessari, the director.
Yes, she was.
Female. Didn't want to say anything in front of Ruby. You know what women are like.
Oh, good heavens. Here
Speaking
we
of
go.
va-va-voom.
Yes, indeed. And Nieves Navarro, of course, became very much the star of giallos, and was always a terrific presence. And of course, I always loved her, because if she showed up, he goes, okay, let's see how long it takes her to get out of her clothes, which was usually pretty quick action.
Not in the westerns, but in Gialla, It was quick.
Oh, yes. But she was quite good. She has a wonderful femme fatale, I think. It's not just that she is a baddie, as we will discover It's that she is a seductive baddie. And in Euro Westerns, that turn was not that common. Because female characters very often, unless say, I'm thinking about maybe Martine Beswick in A Bullet for the General, where but she's a fighter. She's on the side of the good guys. And so very often the female characters would be in the background of a lot of these stories, emphasizing Franco Nero, whoever it might be. And that's not the case in this film, which also makes it unusual.
Yes. Of course, that was also the way in so many American Westerns. The women, if they had a big thing to do, it was loading the guns.
That's right. Exactly.
Who are you? Brian.
One of the things that had always been noted about this movie when it was made in 1964, and the use of the name Ringo, and did it in fact refer to John Wayne in Stagecoach, or did it actually go back to the true gunfighter, Johnny Ringo, very famous, of course, for his participation with the Earps in the gunfight at the OK Corral, and who was found sitting in a chair, scalped and shot. And his death was ruled a suicide. So it's pretty interesting that he managed to scalp himself.
He wanted a souvenir.
Yes, I guess he did. But one of the great, more vicious characters of the West. But that name, that moniker, is something that has always worked very well for hero characters. And, of course, it is also the name of Gregory Peck's character in The Gunfighter.
That's right. And also there's a musician, I think.
I believe there was, yes. And, oh, my gosh, we just...
Where it is. That's all right. Don't worry about it. We'll get along without the key.
I can't think of a better Mexican bandit than Fernando Sancho. He was such an elegant character and presence in Spanish movies going back to the 1940s. And boy, once he put on the sombrero and about 45 pounds, he really changed his image, and there you go.
Yes.
Suddenly,
They're Eli Wallach.
there, yes, indeed.
Except, my goodness, how many times do you suppose he was a Mexican bandit?
Yes.
100, maybe?
Yes.
He was just wonderful. Great presence, great humor when necessary, vicious whenever necessary.
Well, I think, again, we were talking about the direction here is also not just because it's visually quite good and visually sophisticated, but it also shows, again, that there was money behind this production. Even a shot as simple as this.
Or this one against the window.
You bet, against the window. We are in a jail cell. We have movable walls. We have all of these things that exist in movie production. That means that the director can, in fact, move his camera around, get his different points of view and what have you. And, of course, as Euro Westerns continue to be made by just nonstop, just a factory thing for years and years and years until, in fact, they just ran out of ground. The budgets kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller to the point where they felt impoverished. But this was right at the beginning, and this one does not feel that way at all.
No, indeed. Just even the number of extras that they use in a scene like this, just walking through.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And again,
that act, isn't that wonderful? You see how he
Yes.
comes across like that? That is not easy to stage.
No.
Just like the depth of action when we're looking through the window, to have to coordinate everybody. It's really remarkable. Now, this guy holstering his gun, is it my imagination or is he made up to look like Tim Holt?
He very much looks like Tim Holt, does he?
And the music begins again.
Yes, of course.
Oh, here we are again. Lovely action in the back, foreground.
One of the things to notice here, of course, is these films generally, of course, almost exclusively, I should say, were never recorded with synchronized sound, and in fact were done with wild tracks, and everyone just kind of doing what they would want to do, some speaking their own language. So you could literally have scenes with one actor speaking German, another speaking Italian, and another speaking English, and then, of course, it would all be knitted together when the film was dubbed. This sequence is pretty remarkable for its horse work, actually.
Oh, yes.
But here you can tell that the actors, in many cases, are in fact speaking English. The sound mix is good.
It's very good. We're not talking now about the voices, but the sound effects and music
and all of those
Foley,
levels. Yes. This film was distributed in the United States by Embassy Pictures, and Joe Levine, who ran the company, of course, had made a fortune with Hercules, but had specialized in buying European films, some tremendously great ones like Darling, and lots of Italian films, lots of British comedies, and always supervising this post-production work. But this one they really took some care with. And I think they believe that they really were going to be launching something brand new with this actor and with this series. And it didn't really happen in the United States.
No, it didn't. It certainly happened in Europe.
Yes.
Giuliano Gemma had a long and very successful and popular career in Europe, but he really never made that much of an impression in the United States.
Which is a shame. And when we talk about not only his presence, and we'll see some just remarkable examples of his athletic ability.
Oh, yes.
But we're talking about a scope and sense of a Western right here. Look at this chase sequence. And this costs money to do this.
This many horses, this many people who know how to ride.
People know how to ride. It is not throwaway, and Murray Cohn's score here is just absolutely superb. And so I really do think they were looking down the road because they were creating something at the same time that Leone was creating Fistful of Dollars and Corbucci was creating Django.
Right.
And it just that they were all kind of happening at once, but this was the film with the different attitude.
And of course, what so many of the Italian, Spanish Westerns had attitude-wise that was different from what was being done in the United States was in the U.S., the Westerns were aging out. It was a time when I think it was Pauline Kael said something very mean about they keep making Westerns to show that John Wayne can still get on a horse.
I believe she actually said that in her review of El Dorado.
Ah.
And I remember that because, of course, the Westerns were a place where older stars, and of course some of those movies are absolutely fantastic. I think I prefer the Burt Lancaster older Westerns than I do Burt Lancaster younger Westerns.
Oh, and also the Randolph Scott and Joel McRae older Westerns.
Absolutely. Of course, a few that are as good as Ride the High Country. And now here, in taking advantage of Spain in this way, was a wonderful decision. And again, this is all brand new. That's the thing. We would get so familiar with Alameda because of so much production that was going on there, and it became like looking into our own backyards in a lot of ways. We go, oh my God, there's that town again, there's that river again, there's this, there's that. And this is all brand new. And to do something here that is this elaborate, and by the way, Henry, I think this is really worth noting. The use of livestock is not something you commonly saw in Euro Westerns.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, horses, yes, but that was it. Maybe you saw a cow now and then, but flocks of goats or sheep, not at all. Or this many horses.
Absolutely. And this also, in a way, puts a nod towards things like the grass wars, the Johnson County wars, the intrusion of sheep herders into cattle country and the building of ranches and building of empires with that money. And these are just subjects generally that weren't touched on in Euro-Westerns as a rule, because it was almost always, particularly after many had been made, it was a stranger looking for a group of guys who had robbed a bank and killed his wife or killed his son or whatever it was. And they were just strictly revenge stories. And that's not what this is.
No, not at all. No, in many ways, it's sort of the desperate hours.
Absolutely it is. And in fact, that phase of the story is just about to start. And and we wonder with this screenplay, of course, Tessari working with a number of people, including, of course, the great Fernando de Leo.
Yes.
And this goes, I think, also to the idea of the community of Italian filmmakers, because Tessari had legendarily worked on the script to Fistful of Dollars,
right.
had de Leo. And that there was kind of an informality. Tessari had worked, of course, with Leone on the Peplum films.
Right.
And his own personal work had gone back to even things like Hercules and the Haunted World as a screenwriter, which was directed by Mario Bava.
Right.
And
who also, of course, went to direct many fine westerns, horror movies, all sorts of stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's, I think when we started to look at this movie and we start looking at the history around this film and kind of the fuse that was lit by Fistful of Dollars, what we saw there was one director who emerged from the pack to such incredible worldwide influence,
right.
and genre influence, whereas many of the directors, and very fine ones like Tessari, like Damiano Damiani, because I think Bullet for the General is just a stunning piece of work.
Oh, yes.
But these directors were journeymen.
Mm-hmm.
And before they did westerns, they did peplum movies, and they did...
After that, they did their giallos.
They did their giallos. Of course, Lucio Fulci was directing westerns, and then on to his great success in horror with Zombie and The Beyond. In fact, Gemma was in one of Fulci's great westerns, Silver Saddle.
That's right.
But these were not specialists.
No, they weren't. They were men who, as you said, they were journeymen. They did what was needed right then.
That's right. And this is also what was selling. And the international market had just exploded because of the international banking laws and the way to get movies financed, particularly from either foreign pre-sales and selling off territories, which is how a lot of these films were done, which is why someone like Klaus Kinski and William Berger and actors from Germany were very much part of this formula because, of course, the financing, partial financing was coming from Germany.
Right. And, of course, really, if you want to look at the history of Euro-Westerns, it really started in Germany.
Yes, it did.
With the filming of the Karl May stories.
Absolutely.
But even those, of course, had, because the international business had Italian actors, and their Terence Hill, when he was still using his Italian name, was villains in those long before he became a hero.
And always they would then try and draft someone like Lex Barker or someone like that
American identification.
To get the American identification, right, so that they could, in fact, get some sort of American distribution, which at this time usually meant inner cities and drive-ins.
Oh.
American International Television picked up some of these films, but after the success of Fistful of Dollars and United Artists, then every major studio dipped their toe into the Euro-Western
Yes.
pool, particularly Columbia. And, of course, suddenly you had Euro-Westerns, not only with Lee Van Cleef, but also Euro-Westerns with Charles Bronson. And you had them, and I'm not just talking about Once Upon a Time in the West, but you had movies with like Via Rides and 100 Rifles, which were kind of major studio films done under these circumstances.
Right.
And
With a mix of American stars.
exactly, absolutely. And they were, some were very successful. They were all kind of cast from this mold. And the very down at the heels Euro-Westerns that we would see being made with actors like Guy Madison and Ty Hardin and people
Right.
like that were.
At the, at the lower ends of their careers.
And almost all of them very much modeled after the Leone films.
Oh, yes. And most of them not seen in the United States when they originally came out.
Absolutely.
Did they become available? Was that for television or videotape? When did those really come?
Many of them did get sold directly to television and in packages from independent distributors, films like Bad Man's River, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And that, my God, Lee Van Cleef and James Mason, and they couldn't even get it.
Released.
God's Gun. And, of course, now that one was made in Israel.
That's right. There was a whole sort of subgenre of Israeli westerns.
That's right.
Was that the one with Jack Palance also?
Yes, and Van Cleef and Richard Boone.
Right.
And Sybil Danning.
That's right.
And so this was all following what this group of filmmakers were kind of building from scratch.
Yes.
And here is absolutely one of the foundation films. And when we talk about the dubbing, this scene is a terrific example of it because it is dead on.
Oh, yes. Now, here he is drinking his milk and his trial. What strikes me looking at his characters, if I were going to make this movie at the time they made it with an American instead, I think it would be James Garner.
And, well, because you would have the humor without arrogance.
Right. The self-effacing.
Yes.
Self-confident but self-effacing somehow.
Absolutely.
Which he manages to pull off beautifully here.
And, of course, Garner's own Euro-Western attempt, Man Called Sledge, he always regarded as the worst movie he was ever associated with.
But,
this is a beautiful shot. This is really an amazing thing here. And this is Gemma who does this.
yeah, look at that. How long is he riding in there, lying across the back there without
I
falling?
know. This is wonderful.
Oh, my
Look at that.
And there's no question who's doing it.
No, it's amazing.
And he hits his mark.
He hits his mark dead on. He was so athletic, and you and I had actually been discussing it. He's almost like Douglas Fairbanks, and so agile.
Look at
And
that.
look at this. He just is this acrobat.
Folks are sure jumpy around here. First those men shoot at me, then you greet me with your...
And of course, now he started in films as a stuntman and then worked his way up from small parts.
But it's also a wonderful and different way to establish the character's physicality, also establishes his personality immediately. And it's not stoic at all.
No.
And he's a bit of a show-off and can't help but grin all the time. And, of course, everyone sitting here has absolutely no idea what to make of this guy.
Right.
Except, of course, our wonderful Jose Martin, who just wants to kill him.
Yeah, he cuts to the chase.
Yes, he does, cockroach. I think, too, when you see this movie, you're seeing, as we said, the birth of a star who didn't translate to the United States in the way that he really should have. And I understand that now Robert Woods actually had been considered for this role, I think.
Oh.
Isn't that correct?
I believe so. That's right.
And here is this terrific comedic performance that absolutely precursors what Terence Hill would later do in Trinity and My Name Is Nobody.
Very much so.
And you have but it didn't hit. And I honestly can't explain why not. He certainly had the looks and he had the incredible ability.
Right. It makes you wonder why, say, Franco Nero translated and he did not.
Oh my gosh! I mean, Franco Nero hit so big, and the next thing you know, you turn around and he's doing Camelot.
Right.
And such a huge international jump. And of course, Terence Hill, after the success of the Trinity films, this was a few years later, suddenly was being courted by Universal and My Name Is Nobody and Mr. Billion.
Right.
And so they were taking these guys from this talent pool, but not here. And there we see the Christmas tree in the background.
I saw Mr. Billion at Radio City Music Hall. So they really
You
gave
were
him
the
quite
one.
a push. I was lonely, but I was there.
I had one like this in San Antonio.
And now, of course, the major here, Antonio Casas, who was brother Smith and Wesson in the big gun down.
Oh, yes, indeed.
He had quite a career and quite a range of parts.
But he was also very, almost always exclusively cast as the corrupt banker, the corrupt governor, the person with money who was actually pulling the strings for all the grubby outlaws who either worked for him or the lone stranger who was going to come back and blow him away at the end for betraying everyone.
Which it's kind of a fun role for him in this for that reason, because he's really, he's crafty, but he's not corrupt. He's a wise man that is handling a very difficult situation in a very unusual way and very well.
Yes. And here is also, this is what makes this movie interesting, is that there is this love story brewing. Now here, just the care from which this movie was made, you had the shooting into the ceiling and you had dust falling down.
Yes, when do you see that they would take that care?
They would take that care and actually pay attention.
Right. And when's the last time you saw a really funny scene of trying to remove a bullet
with a straight razor?
That's right. Yes, his description of his problems with his with his wife dying and raising his daughters is really, I think, very endearing.
Oh yes, very much so. And Francisco Martin, who shot this movie, did many Euro westerns, and of course had a very good association with Tessari. But one of the films he did shoot was The Texican, the Audie Murphy film with Aldo Sombrell and Broderick
Crawford, right.
And that was Audie's Euro Western. And when it was distributed overseas, it was distributed as a Ringo movie. They slapped that title on it because this became really the marketing tool. The Ringo films didn't turn into quite the name brand that Django did, but certainly Ringo, Django, Sartana, they wanted some sort of continuation and some sort of consistency so that they could, whatever it was, if they put those names on the marquee, then they were guaranteed a certain audience would actually show up, even if those same movies didn't carry those titles here in the States.
That's right. And of course, in Europe, they didn't have the laws or agreements about titles. You could, if you wanted to call your film Django Gets a Shoe Shine, you didn't have to get anyone's permission. You could use that name on anything.
That's right.
And, wait a second. Now, there was a Yul Brynner film, I remember, where he was taking over a role from Lee Van Cleef.
Sabata.
Right. And I understand he didn't even know he was doing that because Sabata wasn't the name on the script when he did it.
Well, and also part of the thing with Yul Brynner there was they thought he would be absolutely furious to know that he was replacing Lee Van Cleef, and he wasn't the first choice. So there was also a little bit of let's protect the ego to protect the movie.
That's right.
And but that film was also, again, coming kind of late in the cycle.
Right.
And things were definitely winding down. And that wonderful documentary in the Spaghetti West, and I believe it is the interview with, I think it is Corbucci, who says that they did exactly what they did every single time. It didn't matter if it was Giallos, it didn't matter if it was police movies, it didn't matter if it was Peplum. They would just keep making them and making them and making them and making them until nobody wanted to see them anymore.
Right.
That they would just run it right into the ground. And he said that was always the pattern for the genre films. And that was where most of these guys, of course, were finding their employment.
Right. Now, of course, one reason for the tremendous number of Italian westerns, Euro westerns, because there were, about 400 in 10 or 12 years?
Yes.
And I don't know if everyone, is aware that in Italy, at the time that they started in the early 60s, there was no television. And television came in very slowly. So in many ways, and I think this was true in other countries in Europe, going to the movies in the 60s in Europe was very much like going to the movies in the United States in the 30s and 40s.
That's very true. And I think a lot of people may not be aware that the non-existence of television was, in fact, what was driving the theatrical business.
Oh, yes.
At that time.
And people went to the movies 2 or 3 times a week.
Absolutely they did. And they just needed this product and needed it, especially in outlying theaters where they were not always going to get the newest American films. But the idea of American genre, even with Italian casts,
right,
that was something that everybody was going to respond to, especially if it was a Western. And
of course, we're talking about Americanizing names of actors and directors on films to pass them off as American Westerns in the United States. But they often played that way in Europe, too. Europeans wanted American Westerns.
Absolutely
initially.
They did, yes. And that was always the thing. It was always just a trick. And now we look at it with some humor, but that was just, let's go ahead and we're getting these dollars in, and it was consistent. And people, oh my God, this was, I don't know who this is starring in this movie, but I don't think it is Robert Widmark. When it did not matter.
Yeah, right. Oh, now the fellow waving the lantern there, whose real name was Manuel Muñiz,
yes,
was known as Pajarito, and he became such a presence in these movies. I believe this is only his second film.
Yes, and of course he worked with Tessari a number of times.
Yes,
and always as usually as Pajarito.
Mm-hmm.
And he's very good in this film because he also tamps down his comedic performance, which generally in Euro Westerns could be very arch, could be very, very over the top.
Yes, the comedians in a lot of the Westerns make Gabby Hayes look restrained.
Yes. Yes. And I love this moment where, let me give you the good liquor.
Oh, yes.
Yes, this is the courting process.
And, of course, it's lovely because she's getting the drink for the other guy who is somehow tolerating the lord of the manor moving in on his woman.
That's right. Fernando is grabbing his alcohol, and then he's going to follow her across the room. And now we have a problem.
Just a bit, yes.
Time for dinner. It's a pretty necklace. Look at it close. It's a pretty neck, too.
Pedro's an unusual fella. For one thing, he's got excellent taste. May I?
This sequence also is unusual for not just because we have a knife going into this, so that's beautifully done.
Well, after all,
good
it's
fun.
Christmas.
Yes, it is Christmas, and there's a Christmas tree. But we have this kind of break from violence and tension coming up that they also normally did not do. And particularly here, I think the influence could even be said it was Ford because, of course, he loved his dance sequences.
Yes, and his singings.
And his
sequences,
singing.
yeah.
And so suddenly it's introduced here, which was also not commonly seen
No.
in Euro Westerns.
And interestingly done with a Victrola
Yes.
rather than a little mariachi band.
Yes, and the Victrola ends up playing a rather important symbolic role, I think, in this because it's, in a way, it's for this movie. I would almost equate it with the Cars and the Wild Bunch. It's definitely about the new West is coming and a new
Right.
attitude, and is also a symbol of wealth.
That's right. There's great talk about wealth in here from time to time. The major's always, Dom Perignon. Yeah.
Oh yes. And this the deviling that Gemma does of Jose Martin, and of course, what we have, as we said, with these character actors who appeared in so many movies and appeared in it shows also where things were in Spain at this time because everybody was going there to make films, including, as you say, we look at Dr. Zhivago. A lot of people, say, well, wait a minute, that was made in Spain? It sure was. Look at that entire cast. And
Wow.
you see Aldo Sombrell and everyone running around in Russia. And, of course, some of these very character actors in this film were in Lawrence of Arabia.
That's right. No, Spain and Italy for setting up productions and Spain for making them.
Yes.
Were such a center of the film industry.
Well, and also, too, as we said, the idea of international production, not only with the money coming in, but also with the talent pool. It wasn't. We don't want to say it was exactly limited, but it was intimate, and
Yes.
everyone knew everybody, and they all kind of contributed to each other's movies, even if it was uncredited, and they kind of, walked into it. Remember, Steve Carver told me a wonderful story that when they were recording the score for Lone Wolf McQuade, which was Damasi, and they were recording in this old church where many of Morricone had conducted the orchestra there many times. And he showed up. Of course, Damasi had worked for him many times, but he showed up to see how the recording session was going and actually had suggestions about some of the players and what have you.
Wow.
And it was all very informal, and it was all just a matter of somebody's making a movie, let's see what's going on, and let's see if we have something we can contribute, which is why even doing research on this particular movie and Tessari's background, for example, and his association with Sergio Leone, and you see that suddenly you're running down all these credits of uncredited contribution to Fistful of Dollars, and here is this one who wasn't credited on for a few dollars more, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just because everybody was kind of passing their own work around and getting everyone's opinion, and why don't we work on this over the weekend?
Yeah,
and
have Dario Argento take a pass at this script.
Absolutely. And I think the community was was a lot more involved with each other, and there was a, if you will, a sense of, I would say, almost neighborly participation.
Yes.
In these movies.
It's funny because in many ways, when we're talking about like journeyman directors, I think of like Warner Brothers and all of the great pros that would go on to whatever genre was needed and do it beautifully. But the difference here is that nobody had their own little fiefdoms. Everyone was, as you say, much more social and worked together, and it really, really helped the material. Improved so many films just probably watching each other work.
I think that's true. And also, how many times when you've spoken to, say, someone like Franco Nero or Aldo Sombral or anyone that we've ever known who was involved with these productions, always say, oh, well, so-and-so recommended this and so-and-so recommended that. And, oh, this one made a phone call and that one made a phone call. And that's very often how these things kind of would come together.
That's right.
It was just through conversations. It was through everyone knowing each other.
One thing I found very interesting about Tesori is, of course, he came into the filmmaking as a screenwriter and wrote, he had 21 writing credits before he directed this. But the interesting thing, unlike most of them that came in as writers, is he continued to write. He wrote many of his own scripts, going well into the 1980s.
Yes. And no, you're right, because I think that there was very often the idea that this is just a progression, that writing was the way to get behind the camera, and once that happened, you didn't have to go back to work on scripts anymore, and he never had that attitude. Neither did DeLeo, and I think a lot of the other filmmakers who were making these movies. And let's also remember that sometimes it was just a matter of necessity.
Oh, yes. You didn't really get rich making these films.
No.
But you made a living.
But also, too, good Lord, I had forgotten about shooting that woman.
Oh, yes.
What we're also seeing is, as we said, these are journeymen, but they're journeymen who had their own vision, who brought their own style to what they were doing, and just the very fact that they were writing their own scripts and everything else. It wasn't just being hired and handed a script, as Gordon Douglas, who I adore, said, the scripts would be delivered on my front lawn like the Los Angeles Times, and then he'd go over to Warner Brothers and he would make the movie. This was a creative process where it was, okay, well, we've got to do a Western, but this is what we're going to do. And so it wasn't quite as, if you will, detached, I don't think.
Right. It was more personal.
I believe it was, even if the movies were being made for very little money. And, of course, the hope always is that they would get the international recognition, and more importantly, that it would get recognition in the States.
Right. That was the real endorsement that they were all looking for.
Oh, yes. And some got it and some did not. And part of the problem, of course, was there was just such a glut of material and so many of the films being made. And we talk about the filmmakers who emerged. This is a beautifully done sequence.
I'd wanted to kill you. You can see for yourself it would have been
What-
very difficult.
If Leone emerged from the Westerns, then you would say Argento emerged from the giallos. Mario Bava, of course, had great success in horror. And, of course, he had an association with American International that led to his doing movies with Boris Karloff and what have you.
Right.
But, so he said these filmmakers, once this was done, did move on to these other genres. In fact, Tassari directed a wonderful giallo with Helmut Berger, The Bloodstained Butterfly.
Yes.
And so many of those films that reached our shores were often not the greatest example of that work.
No, it was a crapshoot which ones we would get.
Absolutely it was. And even someone like Argento had this huge reputation overseas. His movies here were being chopped up and given to sub-distributors and turned into things like Unsane and what have you. So the if you will, the water was kind of running out of the tub, an international production, and where the movies themselves would actually end up as far as the U.S. distributors go. And I think part of the problem was there were so many Euro Westerns that, in fact, the checks just kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller because there was so much product.
That you could always say, why should I pay you
Why
when I
should
can
I
get
pay?
that for less?
And also, too, American audiences were being inundated with European products, too, at the time. And banking laws changed. So it all was this kind of perfect storm that occurred as the Westerns wound down, probably, 10, 12 years after this film was made.
Mm-hmm.
And then it affected the other genres and the ability of those genres, if you will, to find a home, even when they were making wonderful movies.
Well,
This is a great moment, I think, coming up here because, again, as we said, this is really, if you will, the model. Is it the Desperate Hours? Is it the Petrified Forest?
right. It's, as you say, it's one of those with people locked in a room, their enemies on the outside, and the victims on the innermost circle.
Yes.
It's
But it is also organic to the story. It's not a, if you will, forced enclosed space to save money.
Oh, no, it's not. It is not. As a matter of fact, it's interesting that this is not claustrophobic at all,
No, it's not.
whereas most of those stories tend to be, and in fact, use claustrophobia. They're like submarine stories
Yes.
and tend to feel very theatrical, whereas this is very cinematic.
And again, here we are. We're seeing sheep. We're seeing really evidence of a working ranch.
Oh, yeah, not a set.
Not a set and not something that's deserted.
No. Just look at the size of those cactus fields and such. This is not something you throw up to shoot a scene.
Well, and also, too, what we're seeing is that the background of this story is primarily green.
Yes.
It isn't just the parched desert. It isn't the wastelands, which is what we became very used to
Right.
in the Euro Westerns. And of course, and true, this is a story about people with money and they get into trouble, and here they're being held prisoners in their own home. So you wanted a lush background as a contrast to this violence and to the potential for violence. But there were plenty of ways to do that that probably would have saved the production some dough than finding this absolutely beautiful location that gives the movie an entirely different look.
And a look that I can't think of any American Western is achieving.
Yes.
It's a really European kind of a success.
And this composition is just beautiful, even with Gemma almost on the edge of the frame. I think ours are. There we go. But the attitude, of course, of critics. Now we're adjusting. The attitude of critics and everyone else to these movies tended to be very dismissive, only because they thought they were overly violent.
Right.
And for 1964, I mean, they're thinking about this. Remember Pauline Kael and Judith Crist in particular took after the Leone films like crazy. I remember Judith Crist, great, "The blood flows like Chianti," and she would make these statements that were kind of silly. But it was, of course, this is all before violence in American movies really exploded after Bonnie and Clyde. But the attitude of the films was seen as cartoonish and lampooning and almost an insult to American Westerns, which I don't think they were.
Oh, no, not at all. But they were their own.
They were their own. And as Cesare said, that Leone always took what he did very seriously. And this other wonderful quote, he said, well, there were two things to emphasize. You either emphasized violence or you emphasized humor. Sergio emphasized violence. I emphasized humor. But there is a great deal of violence in this movie.
Oh, yes.
And the humor is the contrast. The humor is the attitude of our lead.
Right.
It's Ringo's attitude. It's not something where you have something just where it's supposed to be a satire.
Right. With an American film with that kind of humor, there's an understanding that nobody really gets hurt.
Yes.
And here, lots of, as you say, that woman is randomly picked and shot because it's sunrise or sunset.
I love that being shot in the back. Now, when you had mentioned earlier James Garner, and we're talking about this idea of humor in Westerns, by this time, humor in Westerns, quite honestly, you would be thinking of someone like Burt Kennedy.
Right.
And that the whole thing would be kind of taking classic Western situations and turning them on their ear and turning them upside down and, mud fights and that kind of
diving into a grave because they think they spot gold in it.
Right. And a lot of rollicking kind of nothing is serious.
Right.
Here, it is the direct contrast to what is going on. And that's why I think it works so well. Because these guys are serious. I mean, they're killers. They're steeped in blood, and they're shooting and stabbing and cutting throats and doing all this stuff. And the fact that it doesn't affect our hero in the way we normally – that's where the humor comes from. But you could – we had mentioned Die Hard earlier. What's the difference? This is long before Stephen D'Souza and Joel Silver got a hold of it.
But yeah, it is very much the same philosophy. Okay. It's. I was just thinking about the scene where Ruby was taking shots at the flower pots to show that she knew how to use a gun.
Yes.
And one of the interesting things about that is compared to most of the scenes you see in movies where people are shooting cans or bottles or whatever, is that they have shot a person pulling the trigger, boom, shot a thing being hit, shot pulling the trigger, shot being hit. They don't show you with the firing of the shot and the thing being hit at the same time. What that, of course, calls for is there's somebody standing off screen with a real gun that is hitting those pieces exactly at the same time she's firing. And that's the sort of thing that takes amazing skill and preparation and time. And it's the sort of thing that people just did not do. And in another way, it's interesting, in Euro Westerns, because of course they were copying American Westerns as much as possible early on, and they would show somebody shooting and the person being hit in the same shot.
Well, of course, that was something that Clint Eastwood almost immediately addressed to Sergio Leone, going, well, they don't normally do this. They usually have to break it up, also because of censorship.
Right, exactly.
And they just shrugged. They'd never heard of such a thing, and they didn't care, and there you go. And, of course, in Fistful, you had those wonderful shots taken from Eastwood's hip where he draws the gun and shoots the guys off the fence and all these things. And you see that consistently in these films. And you're absolutely correct. And the idea that there isn't that disconnect between the use of the firearm and the impact it causes.
Right. You know, it's funny because that kind of thing actually goes back to is Max Sennett comedies and pie fights. Mabel Normand became a big star because she could absolutely hit anything with a pie. So you could have her throwing and the hit in the same shot. When this moved on to cheaper films and Three Stooges talkies, it always became cut throwing, cut hit.
Yes.
Just because it didn't require the skill.
That's right. And also, too, with something where you're doing the cutaway of someone feeling the impact of a bullet or what have you, you can control that better. Mm-hmm. And the idea of the gun flash and then someone reacting to that always had a different kind of impact.
Yes.
Than just somebody falling over, sanitized into the dirt or whatever it was they were going to do.
That's all right.
And
Sheriff won't suspect a thing, and I will know that our plan has succeeded. Go get the horse.
this sequence here, I think, is notable. We see the beautiful day for night, even that wonderful light source coming up over the mountains.
Right.
But it's properly timed, which is also something you did not ordinarily see in these films.
That's right.
Some of the night for night photography, particularly in a movie like Minute to Pray, A Second to Die, and we can think of a few others. Even Django is quite good and quite gorgeously done. But day for night was always a little tricky and required extra effort. And once again, they did it.
Right. And a lot of times, of course, it required extra effort on the part of the audience member to say, oh, this is still supposed to be nighttime.
Yes, and not 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
When it was actually shot.
Yes.
Be careful. The fuse is still burning.
I have never seen anyone with teeth as bright as Ringo's teeth.
Got an old saying in Texas.
Oh.
God created men equal. The sixth God made them different.
There we go.
Now, what I'd like to know, was that a misquote or is that done on purpose? Because, of course, the original saying was God made man or men, but Sam Colt made them equal. So this is actually reversing
I think
that.
this is Ringo's own interpretation
Right.
of that. And I think it's wonderful that they did that because it also presumes familiarity
To
with
get
the
the
quote.
joke.
Yes, to get the joke.
Lucky for you, I was here to catch you.
And here we go. Now, our friend here, Jose Martin, we were talking about actors in Spain who worked a great deal and in major productions and smaller things. And, of course, he was in A Bullet for the General, and which, again, I bring up because just one of my favorites, a film that you and I did a commentary on, Pride and Vengeance.
Right.
And he also had quite an association with Jesus Franco when he was doing his movies in Spain, including things like Castle of Fu Manchu and movies like that. But his probably most notorious credit is Cutthroat's 9. And that film, done really when this cycle was, as we say, kind of running out of ground.
Running out of steam.
And the film was released as a horror movie,
Right, not as a Western.
not as a Western at all. And it's actually kind of a really fascinating movie in its way, made for absolute zero money in the Pyrenees. But it has really a very clever script, and he is wonderful in it. But the violence and the level of the grotesquerie is so intense that some people just can't even
Make it through it.
make it through it. Yeah, they can't get their minds around
It
it.
becomes that sort of like the Herbert Lom You will see someone with their tongue ripped out.
Yes, Mark of the Devil.
That's it. Right.
Yes. And, well, he had also quite a standing in horror films because he had also a very good association with Paul Naschy.
Right.
And did a number of films with him, including Face of the Devil and Count Dracula's Great Love, which was where the Spanish film industry was at that time.
Right.
So as we said, these fellas just never stopped, and they would just go from project to project to project when it was available to them. As we said, unfortunately, the banking situation changed, and the distribution of the movies changed when getting everything out to the United States was not a sure thing.
Right. Because of the sheer volume
Yes.
of films.
Well, when Embassy released this movie, this was right around, of course, very shortly before, from the U.S. side, they did Billy the Kid versus Dracula and Jesse James meets Frankenstein's daughter. At the same
high
time,
watermark.
yes,
cinema.
but at the same time doing things like Darling, starring Julie Christie. So it was definitely Joe Levine was letting the pendulum swing in all directions.
Oh, yeah. You knew what product was paying for what product.
Right. And, of course, they finally, even after importing all of their so many of their productions and also Edgar Wallace thrillers from Germany and things like that, they had a very good library to sell to television. Right. They had their biggest hit, and it was not as a Western. It was, of course, The Graduate.
Right. Which is just not a film you would have expected to come from that world at all.
No.
Once again, taking advantage of that beautiful building. You never see that on a set anywhere.
No.
The quality of the architecture here is remarkable.
Well, and again, we're staying with the day for night material.
And it's convincing.
It is convincing.
Ooh.
There we go.
I guess he was moving.
Yep. And of course, that movement also, Fistful of Dollars, and also in For a Few Dollars More, very notorious when Eastwood takes the guy out of the gambling hall and the one fella keeps crawling across the floor and he pumps another couple into him while he's stepping over him. And the casualness of it, it reminds me of the wonderful statement Elmore Leonard once made when someone asked him about gunfights in Westerns. And he said, I never understood it. If someone's coming at you with a gun, you shoot them in the foot, shoot them in the face, shoot them any way you can shoot them because you're just going to stop them.
Right.
Yes, there was no grand standing in the middle of the street and facing down and all of that stuff.
I always love when the song ends on my watch, we will shoot.
Yes.
I mean, it makes wonderful scenes, but it makes no sense.
Well, the operatic aspect
Yes.
of what Leone accomplished is so grand and so much, if you will, his own music, if you will.
Yes.
That's why I think anytime anyone ever tried to imitate it, and so many did, that they failed because they didn't hear the scenes, they didn't envision things exactly the same way. That origin point, that passion was not there. And here we have a director who, of course, had worked with Leone very closely.
Right.
And went his own way and beautifully and very effectively.
Nice spit take.
Yes.
In this shot, I always think of Linda Crystal and High Chaparral, but of course that was a couple of years later. Always wonder if there was any influence in that direction.
Well, it's very, very possible because who knows what The High Chaparral Gang we're going to see at the drive-in.
Yeah, who knows what Cameron Mitchell told them. Because,
Exactly.
of course, he was doing Italian Westerns right before that series.
Well, of course, Cameron had done Minnesota Clay for Sergio Corbucci also right at this time.
Right.
And Richard Basehart had done his Western for Michael Carreras, right? And it really was this thing that here were these movies, and they were all, as we keep saying, simultaneous with Magnificent Stranger being the breakout, but of course not reaching American shores until quite some time after it was made.
Right. Like was it 67 that it finally got to the U.S.?
But of course it is this huge success in Europe, as was Django.
Right.
But then where did that one, Fistful was the one that got pulled out of the pack, even though this reached our shores, as did Django,
Right.
as did Minnesota Clay. But what was going to happen with those stars? And Cameron did feel, I think, a little bit that he had kind of gotten there first, but it didn't take off. And I think part of the issue there was Cameron, and he's very good in that movie.
Yes.
But Cameron Mitchell was a character star, and he had kind of olive skin, and he had dark hair, and he didn't look that dissimilar from the Spanish actors he was acting opposite.
That's true.
And that certainly was not the case with Eastwood and with our friend here.
Right, who may have been here, but he was a lot lighter than Cameron Mitchell.
Yes, and younger.
And prettier.
Yes, very much so. Super pretty.
I love this, I don't know what motif that of sort of the ticking clock, even though there's no clock involved.
Yes. Now, this is, again, the idea of the light ingeniousness of the character. And it's almost...
MacGyver before MacGyver.
It's MacGyver. Well, it's he plays it like he's a prankster.
Yes.
And that, I think, is, again, just so such an interesting choice in versus all of this dynamic that is going on. And another movie from this time that I like quite well, also it was Corbucci, which has a very good female villain. And that is Albert Band's The Hellbenders that he produced and
yes.
wrote. Yes.
That's a tough picture.
Yes, it is. And but the idea always of a woman kind of being the volatile element
Yes.
in the formula rather than just being someone who's beautiful and victimized and is terrified, so she stays in her house while the bandits run wild and what have you. That was another film that took that to its new level.
Right.
Django, of course, went kind of in another direction with the fallen woman
Right.
who had been part of the outlaw gang, tries to reestablish herself, and is rejected.
That's right.
Yep.
Actually, I always loved in Ride the High Country the incredibly innocent woman
Yes.
who brings the entire plot together just by blundering in her supreme innocence.
Yes, just by existing.
Yeah.
Yes,
And existing in a place where there are no other women when she gets there.
that's right.
Another great shot.
That is a great shot, and it's just so. Well, God knows how many times I had to do it.
Oh, yeah, to make it so casual.
And just another also beautiful example of camera control and composition.
Oh, yeah. Composition is so casual looking, like as casual as the men seem to be, except every key point is filled. It's just beautiful.
Oh, yes. And, well, actually also pointing out, as we said, that everyone was in movies like Lawrence of Arabia or Dr. Zhivago. Don Siegel made a movie in Spain in the late 50s, a pretty horrible one, if you've ever sat there, called The Spanish Affair. At least it's boring anyway. But our friend Mr. Martin is in that one too.
Oh.
It's about 1957.
Now, is this the kid brother? I've never quite understood his relationship, the little boy.
From what I'm understanding of this young man is that he worked around, his mother had worked around the house, and that he ended up as being part of the household.
Oh, that's right. Oh, it was his mother who was shot.
His mother is the one who was shot, and Ringo says, don't mourn for the dead.
That's right.
When Sancho and his men are well into the canyon, I'll set off the dynamite.
Good Lord, those teeth just absolutely. Ringo, you need to do
Al
something.
Jolson time here.
I know it. You're going to give yourself away
That's
coming
right.
over the hill. If you keep smiling.
Just do a lot of nodding. Yes.
I think the casting here of George Martin is very, very good. As his
sheriff.
role as the oh, here we go.
And now we forget what we're going to say.
Yes, now we forget exactly what we're going to say. We have to pay attention to this. And boy, he always seems to get into this, and here we are with the director's wife.
It could be a very risky job. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And he
There's
gets
the
to
boy.
watch, and yes. Oh,
I love that
that's
he
right.
tests the
Yes,
pitchfork. I hope this is going to make a big enough hole
yes.
for 5. Yes. Do
Actually,
it again, kid. Come on, come on. She's a tough little gal, but
What that moment always reminded me of was the killing. Remember in the barn in Violent Saturday when Ernie
with
Borgnine
Ernie, yes,
takes the
is the
pitchfork. Yep.
angry Amish guy.
Yes. And well, now
Again,
that we're
beautiful day for night.
beautiful,
Look at that.
and this is a really nicely done sequence, and he has been wanting to take care of her for a while,
Oh yeah.
and this is finally the night when he's insisting it's going to happen.
And doesn't Sancho essentially say, "Go after her"?
Yes. And here we go. And Ringo now has a great reason to.
What happened to you anyway?
It's none of your business.
Yep, there we go.
Cockroach.
Just a minute.
And here. Oh, my.
Oh, this is a lovely bit.
Yes.
I did. Ringo.
So you have to call for help, do you?
And
Did you see the scar on his cheek?
yes.
Yeah, do you know the story of that?
No, I don't.
He was a kid growing up, I think, in Rome, and found a leftover bomb from the Second World War and triggered it. And it blew up, and they were able to fix most of his face, but they never got rid of that scar. That's when he was, I think, about 11.
Oh, my gosh. I had never heard that story. Now, Henry, of course, you met.
Oh yeah, I did have the pleasure of talking to him in February of 2013 at the LA Italia Festival, where his daughter had made a documentary about him, and so they were showing that and some of his films. And I remember I talked to him for just a couple of minutes, and I asked him, "Oh, isn't that great?"
I love it.
I asked him which was the favorite of his films, and he said, I made 17 Westerns, but I don't know the titles in English. I said, but A Pistol for Ringo and The Return of Ringo. And also Arizona Colt he liked very much, and so do I.
Oh, Arizona Colt's very good. And his ability here, we're seeing, of course, he had been a stuntman, and the way he is handling this fight,
Oh, wow.
it's really wonderful because it's very athletic.
But it's not ridiculously
No.
exaggerated. Oh, I.
Yes, that was
And then as I say that-
as you say that, there we go through the wall.
I stand corrected.
And cockroach. Oh, I love it. Yes. I'm going to give up, but no.
There's nothing like a fist fight in a barn or a stable. They're just better than any place.
Oh,
There's
yes.
so many things to hit each other with, to throw each other through.
And throw into each other's eyes and get this advantage and that advantage. But what we're going to say about the casting of George
yes.
Martin, and he's actually one of the reasons this fight is happening, is that he, of course, is this sheriff character. He is engaged to the young lady. And so much of this is this is how he is handling these outlaws.
Right.
And it is, depending on Ringo, to be the force of violence for him. But it's a very realistic performance. It's not over the top, and you're sympathetic to him. And he's, I think he's quite good. And he's very
is.
understated.
Yes, and as a character in a very difficult position.
Yes.
Ooh. A lot of nice knife work in this picture.
Yes. And returning that knife. That's a beautiful shot. That
Oh, that pullback?
Yes, that
Oh,
pullback and
Sorry, Sancho. He forced me to do it.
coming over. Yeah, just wonderful.
I placed dynamite. With everything that happened, I completely forgot to tell you about it.
Just about anyone else making that would have been a cut to that shot.
Absolutely, it would have been. And it's also a tribute to Gemma. He keeps going from one physical act to dialogue, as you said, hitting his marks, coming across in the scene. And look at this. We've moved. We now do a push in to a single.
And
Good
that's
Lord.
all one
all
shot.
all one shot. And that is not easy to do, and it's especially not easy to do when you have so much physically going on, because that included the death.
That's right. It starts with the death. And then
Starts
goes
with the
on.
death, so you have special effects, you've got all of this stuff. Oh,
I forgot to tell you, amigo. While you weren't here, I gave Slim a different signal.
And now you find out who the really tough guys are who'll beat someone who's tied up.
yep.
Tim Holt would never have done that in real life.
But here, I think also is we say that the tone of the movie really has shifted at this point. And he is keeping more of, if you will, a brave face in so much of this and all of this hell and fury, if you will, that's being rained down upon him. But it's not dour.
No.
And what a juggling act that is that Tessari accomplished with this.
Yes, the shift in tone, not seeming abrupt, but simply the progress of events.
Well, that's beautifully put, Henry, because what we've been discussing as far as the tonal change and the change within the drama of the film, not only is that just difficult to do, period, it is almost impossible to see very often in movies of this type, because it takes care and it takes a certain type of vision, I think, from the filmmakers in order to accomplish it, certainly to accomplish it with any effectiveness.
Oh, yes.
And sometimes these films were so compromised that was not available to them, or they couldn't do it.
They wouldn't have the preparation time necessary.
Right.
Of course, simply
Natural ability.
the art to do it.
Well, Gemma had a wonderful quote about both Leone and Tessari. He said, quote, "Both combined violence and irony, but Leone accentuated the violence and Tessari the irony." And that pretty much says it all because, of course, with Leone, you have these wonderful comic moments.
Yes, indeed.
But they are almost comedic breaks.
Yes.
And here it is all of this wonderful natural flow, as you said, coming from our central character, who is, of course, frustrating the hell out of all these bandits because they can't get the best of him, and he's just driving them all absolutely crazy.
Oh, the endless negotiation
Yes.
when he seems to have absolutely no position to bargain from is just wonderful, wonderful writing.
Another part of the deal with the sheriff is that I was to drive the wagon. Because if he don't see me, he'll smell a rat, and hostage or no hostage, his men is going to open fire. It's just a matter of principle. I don't enjoy
How many times does he say it's a matter of principle?
That has become the tagline, yes. And
No gun for you, amigo. And you'll sleep in the stable tonight, away from the hostages. I wouldn't want you to be tempted.
One thing I hate's a man who's suspicious for no reason. Well, I guess
when we were talking also about the idea of, the journeyman and what everybody brought individually and to these projects, and the background that everybody would have, say, necessarily in other genres, whether it was comedy, whether it was horror, science fiction, or whatever it might be. And two of the peplums, of course, that Tessari wrote were horror themes. In fact, more than one. With Hercules in the Haunted World, Hercules and the Vampires, or Goliath and the Vampires, rather, and Goliath and the Dragon. And if you have ever seen the half sheet to Goliath and the Vampires, which is actually up in my bathroom, a beautiful painting by Ronald Brown, and Goliath and the Dragon was really one of the last of those films. And I believe that poster actually was designed by Paul Blaisdell.
Really?
And it shows, those were from American International, but it shows that Tessari, he was playing that string right out to the end, and then the shift to another genre.
Right. When they couldn't give away a Peplum movie anymore.
That's absolutely correct. And the irony being here that, of course, the distributor for this film had made his fortune with Hercules.
Right. But he knew when to get out.
Yes.
Oh. And that is, what a lovely throw.
Yes.
I mean, absolutely convincing.
Get the wagon loaded. We haven't got all day.
This burst of rage that we have here is this is quite amazing the way this is done, because not only is it the precursor for everything that is about to happen here, but it is truly the last straw, and that we have been building and building and building to a moment where Ringo is going to just soak the ground
Yes.
with bandit blood. And this is wonderful too, because it gives our daughter character here, it gives her something to do, and she is active in the climax of the movie.
Oh, yeah. She's not just
No, she is
Sitting
saving
there.
everybody. And
Oh,
there
yeah.
she is,
Wow. Whoa.
Yes. Even
Shooting backwards into
yes,
a
indeed. And then just,
running wagon. My goodness.
yes. And
And here they come scrambling. And
this is a very well done chase scene, and it is leading everybody, of course, up to this box canyon, and we can see exactly what's going to happen. And here also we have a wonderful sense of, I think, structure, because now our sheriff is going to be effectively doing his job.
yes, he finally gets to chance to be heroic.
He gets his chance to be heroic. He's been holding off and holding off and holding off. That's really very nice.
That's a very nice explosion.
Yes.
Drop on the left could be a little heavier, I think.
Yes, I think so too.
But the
yes.
long shot is beautiful.
Yeah.
And that's the hard one.
And I really like the way, again, that this character is portrayed, because he's not a dolt.
No, he's not. He's a very frustrated guy, and yet he isn't being childish about it, as they often would in things to make the other guy more of a hero.
That's a beautiful composition there.
Oh, yes. Beautiful. Taking great advantage of the fact that this is made for a big, wide screen.
Absolutely. And this kind of horsemanship, even going down a hill like that with one of these animals, and especially when they get stubborn and they don't want to go down a hill like that, and it gets very, very difficult. And you have a team there. That's a six-up.
That was him.
That was him. Absolutely.
I've been on the sets of a lot of small westerns in the last few years. And the toughest thing to do in them is just to make people look like they know how to ride a horse in and out of town.
Oh,
It's
no, the horse control thing is you really have to know what you're doing. And we're seeing wonderful, wonderful examples of it in this film. And it's something that you kind of take for granted because it's such a classic and standard visual until you see somebody doing it poorly.
right. You don't realize it's a big deal until it's done badly. And they say,
That's right.
"Oh, let's go, guys," and they all leave at 2 miles an hour.
Yes, bumping into each other.
Right. Ooh. The big bag o' money. It's a pretty one.
Yes, it's a carpet bag.
That's right. From a real carpet, not just a piece of
Yep.
fabric. Boy. I wish I could run upstairs like that.
I know.
Looking
Just
that cool.
taking 2 and 3 at a time, and
I get the athleticism all around on this thing.
yes, this is a great sequence,
Oh,
and
it is.
it's not just that we're seeing Gemma's, if you will, ability and his how assured he is physically, but you're also seeing great directorial choreography. This is
Yes.
wonderful.
Oh, and
Landing on
the
top of the piano and then kicking the guy over the rail. It's oh my
Just-
God.
Just a thing of beauty.
It really is. Because it was so completely in contrast to the way Western heroes were becoming more and more stoic, more and more leaning out of the frame, more and more leaning out of the action until somebody had to pull a gun.
Right. Yeah, they sure don't hold back.
No.
Here.
And whether, the idea of the Westerner being a character who stands alone, does not communicate, of course, ultimately explodes.
Yes, but he's got to be the strong, silent type.
Strong and silent, absolutely. And that just isn't Ringo.
Not at all.
No.
which makes them so much fun to be so different.
But the confidence, I think, that Gemma portrays, this is a wonderful thing.
Oh, yes.
The confidence he portrays here with his character and the way he does this, it's not, the snarky jokiness that
Right.
Terence Hill always displayed.
I love Terence Hill, but
I do too.
But the thing is, in the Trinity films, you never believe any of it. It's all circus.
It is.
It's for fun. Whereas here, you believe that people are dying.
This is a beautiful bit that's coming up here. It's very clever.
Oh yes. Why Waterloo in particular? I wonder.
Yes.
Compadre, you're always looking for a gun. Is that the only one you can find?
More firecrackers.
Firecrackers.
And of course, under the Christmas tree.
Right. Festive.
And this is a really superb moment.
Yes.
And it's very well directed.
Watch out for all those saints.
Oh, yes.
I don't know if it's 7 years bad luck or what, but don't shoot them. Oh, yes. Here we go.
The cues that are chosen here are also really wonderful. And remember in 1964, so this film and Fistful, and when Ennio was really starting to make his mark with Westerns, these were the movies that became the templates for everything that came afterwards.
That's right. Absolutely.
And especially the cueing for the action and little things like that moment with the recognition in the bell and seeing the reflection in it and knowing he can ricochet from it.
Yeah, that was setting up all the rules.
Absolutely it was. But of course this, you say that, Henry, and of course this movie is a film that did not end up setting up any rules. This is the kind of the orphan.
That's true.
Despite the international success, and now Ringo is riding away.
Hey, you left this.
But he left a carpet bag full of money.
What a guy.
And he left these for you. He said the sheriff needs it more than he does.
It's just romantically, it's really, really an interesting choice.
Well, and also, too, because we have this character who was in love with the woman who was running the whole
Kidnapping.
show. Yeah, she was.
Yes. He didn't take all the money. He didn't leave all the money. He took what he was owed.
It's a matter of principle.
That's a matter of
A principle. Cockroach.
And now here we go with the great theme song refrain, which was a hit overseas, as was the movie.
That's right.
But I'm so glad we got to do this, Henry, because this movie deserves recognition and it deserves attention.
And it has not gotten the appreciation it deserves.
So this was a real pleasure.
Absolutely.
You know Ringo, he was cold and jovial.